Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with a video here. It is what is it is September 23rd, 2025, and I've been kind of a little bit busy the last few days, so forgive me for not posting, but I'm back here. And one of the things I've wondered about is whether I should talk about Charlie Kirk. I've never heard a speech by Charlie Kirk, so let me just get that out of the way first. But of course, I've been following it. How can you help not following what's been going on following his murder? He's been raised to kind of a not a neocon, a MAGA. I guess you could say a MAGA, a demigod at this point, as such a saint or something like that. He would practically get an icon, and put in churches. And I think they're actually there's some kind of move for that in certain quarters. But what I want to talk about is the fact that, from my point of view, a lot has been said about his conservative views and his controversial views and his some of his policy switches and things like that. Why did some people love him? Why did some people hate him? And I think what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to put all of that into perspective, because I think that what is actually going on here, what I try to do in my writing and my videos, is trying to get to the real heart of the matter. What is this really all about? And I would submit to you that the vast majority of the commentators and the people who are talking about this issue really have missed the critical issue that's involved here, which is that Charlie Kirk represented a cultural war attack on quote-unquote liberal values, but that is not what the conflict is about. The conflict is about endless war abroad and class war at home. That's what the conflict is actually about. And Charlie Kirk fell for all that. He lives in the United States in a very narrow milieu, and so he saw some things, and I think he got some things right, but in a lot of ways he really missed it. So I'm just going to go through some thoughts that I have and I shared, and I'm going to make a disclosure that I had a kind of discussion with Grok, the AI tool, because with AI I can ask a question, they can answer it, and I can answer it back and say, well, what about this? And the thing is that it does facilitate research on the internet, so that can be quite helpful. But you have to be careful of the quality of the research. It's not always so accurate. And because I do study things in great depth, there are some issues that I will have with these AI engines. For example, at one point I said that the United States has never had to wage a defensive war. Well, they took issue with me on that. They said, well, England did invade the United States in 1812, but there was another factor. America's hands weren't clean. I think they were trying to invade Canada, and so the British, counterattacked. So the U.S. was not exactly an innocent child in that situation. And the other example they gave was Pearl Harbor, where we were attacked by the Japanese. Again, yes, we were attacked, but it wasn't as if the vast Japanese army invaded us the way they did China. And in China, they killed some estimates between 20 million and 35 million people in China were killed by the Japanese war on China. The United States has never had to deal with that. We had a pinprick event at Pearl Harbor, which was actually fomented because Franklin Delano Roosevelt cut off Japan's energy supplies, making it very difficult for Japan to pursue their own, nefarious, fascist, imperialistic ambitions. So it was basically a fight between an upstart Asian imperial power in Japan versus the mighty USA, which was not going to allow that kind of thing to happen. China is ours, and Japan, you have no right to do anything to prevent our taking over the world. So that's what that was about. But getting back to the issue of Kirk, so he was a polarizing Trump loyalist for sure. He built Turning Point USA to mobilize young conservatives, but he was divisive in terms of his inflammatory rhetoric. He championed traditional Judeo-Christian values, which is anti-abortion, traditional family, anti-LGBT rights, resonating with his base, but drawing accusations of bigotry. What he did was he liked energizing conservative youth, but he's also been criticized for his kind of xenophobic attitudes and from distracting from systemic issues, which I'll get into. One of the interesting aspects of his career was that he initially was extremely favorable towards Israel. And one of the things that struck me about him from what little I've seen was how he was so, what would the word be? So he was so intense in his support of the state of Israel. And when people said, he said, Israel wasn't committing genocide. And I just have to, they say he's in a debate, he's so good at debates. And I would have said, well, Charlie, I think it was Yoav Gallant, who was the defense minister of Israel. He said he was going to cut off the food, the water, the medicine, the energy of Israel. That sounds kind of genocidal, don't you think? His thinking was, could be distorted in various ways. Let's put it that way. But what was interesting was that he did start to shift his position, and I think there were several reasons for that. One was that his own base, what Israel has done has been so egregious that in one way it's united the American and worldwide left, which is anti-imperialistic and anti-genocidal, and it's also motivated the right in the United States, the Christian community, the younger Christians who see what's going on, and they know this is like a basic human value. You do not do to other human beings what Israel has been doing to Palestine. That's just the way it is. And so he was motivated partly by just that realization, I think, but he was also motivated by the fact that he had gotten a lot of funding from the Israeli lobby and Israeli interest in oligarchic interests, Zionist oligarchic interests, and they were demanding loyalty from him, and yet at the same time he was seeing with his own eyes, and he was seeing what his base is telling him, and that put him into conflict with those people who basically funded his movement for all practical purposes. But I think there was one other factor that has been maybe not so much emphasized, but Benjamin Netanyahu is he's a world historical figure. Let's put it that way. I won't compare him to any of the despots that have appeared throughout history, but by name. But apparently, he is he's single-minded. You got to hand that to him. But he, from what I can tell, his manner of communicating with people is so overbearing that he really puts people off. And if you have any degree of human agency, you'll say, you just don't tell me what, I'm sure I'm a human being. I can see for myself. Don't tell me that Israel is not guilty of all the things that it's doing, and don't demand from me that I become subservient to you. And I think that he reacted in a personal way to Netanyahu, and which is why Netanyahu is so insistent on saying that he had nothing to do with killing Charlie Kirk, even though he's been gloating about the fact that he kills Hamas leaders and Hezbollah leaders and Iranian leaders all over the place. But no, I didn't kill Charlie Kirk. No, no, not me. I'm above that. Charlie Kirk loved Israel. This is Benjamin Netanyahu. So so that was something that was interesting. The other thing is that because of his kind of nationalistic feelings, which is even though I consider myself on the left, I also I have some sense. I'm not like a this aggressive nationalism, which says we have the right to railroad the rest of the world, to make them do what we want them to do, and for us to steal their resources and kill their leaders if they don't do what we want. But at the same time, we don't really want people interfering in our internal affairs. And I think any fair-minded person, whether a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, socialist, anything, if you have any sense of loyalty to at least the ideals that America represented of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that kind of, and all men are created equal. If you have any kind of appreciation for that, regardless of the many failures of U.S. Society, but at least those kinds of things, and so I think, and he had some sense of that, some sense of national pride, and he didn't like being kind of used by the Israeli lobbies to get their way, and that was another major issue. So let's see. Now the other aspect of this is that what concerned me when I would hear this kind of stuff, and I would, I'm speaking on a personal point of view. I want to see a healthy society, and I think that there were some aspects of American society that were that denigrated, quote unquote, family values, and I think, let's put it this way: there's an international consensus that LGBT values do not necessarily receive support from societies, whether you're from in Russia or in Africa or in Latin America or many countries all over the world. There's kind of like an inherent resistance to those kinds of ideas. That's just a matter of empirical fact. So I don't feel. I think, yeah, if people want it, whatever people do in their bedroom, whoever they're with, that's their business. But you don't force that down people's throats, just as you don't force anything down people's throats. You put out your whatever the idea is, but you don't. This kind of aggressive evangelism, so to speak, whatever stripe it comes in, is going to run into resistance. So, but the issue that I have that concerned me about him was that he talked about family values, but he didn't talk about economic issues. He did to some degree talk about the kind of imperialism of wars abroad, and that we should be spending our money at home. But I think he was looking at it from the point of view of our own personal interests, not from our personal of MAGA interests, not from the point of view of universal human values. That is, that invading other countries and having a military all over the world, it's not just taking money out of our collective pockets as citizens of the United States, but it also is like a crime against humanity. Aggressive war is a crime against humanity, and I'm not sure that he really saw things in that light. He saw things more from a very U.S.-centric point of view, that's not a bad thing, but it doesn't look at the whole picture. He doesn't. When he talked about family values, he says, he agreed with it. He had a wife, he had a couple of kids. It looked like a very nice family. They probably had a nice family life. But you know, he was rolling in dough. He had lots of money, so he could afford to be, you know, a good father. But what if you're working 2 jobs and your wife is working 2 jobs and you can barely make the rent, and the landlord increases the rent 10% every year? I actually knew this guy who came from New York City, and he bought some, you know, probably kind of slummy building in Manhattan, you know, like 40 years ago, and he raised the rent 10% every year, and he told me that he used to give a very nice gift of brandy to the judge, who just happened to rule in his favor, you know, whenever one of his tenants brought him to court. So you know, if you're on the other end of that deal, where your rent is going up by 10% a year, but your salary is not, then you have to find another job. And when you have to find another job, then it puts less family time, less quality time in your family. And so this is not creating a healthy society. And I was just looking at population figures yesterday, and the population, the replacement, in order to have a replacement population, so you have males and females, and the general population is roughly evenly divided between males and females. But in order to keep the population at the same levels or increase it, you have to have more kids than the family unit of the husband and the wife. But it turns out that the United States has a replacement of like 1.6. There's 1.6 children per family, when you really need to have 2 or 2.1 or something above 2 in order to replace the population. And if you don't have that, you're going to have gradual decline in population, which is going to cause significant social problems down the line, because you'll have an older population, and when they retire, like somebody like me, you're gonna be consuming more than you're producing. Let's put it that way, and so you need to have to have a balanced society. You need a balance between older and younger, and when you have a declining population, it goes out of balance. That's the issue. So the question is, how do you do that? And the issue, and this is across the board. It's both in the United States, it's in Europe. Even the replacement numbers in Russia, 1.4. The number in China is like an average of 1 child per family, and so this means that the population is going to be going down, down, down. And so I was recently in discussion with this Russian woman. She did a very interesting video where she was talking with this guy about this demographic problem in Russia. And what they're saying is that although the economy looks reasonably okay right now, and I've been there, it looks, you know, I mean, the supermarkets are full and people have, you know, it seems okay. But on the other hand, a good friend of mine who's a doctor told me that he and his wife, you know, they're okay because they own their own apartment. But if you have an apartment that where your salary does not, you know, support the cost of rent of an apartment, then you've got a problem. And you know, I like to point out that in the Soviet Union, people got free apartments, and especially if you had a family, that you could get a free apartment. And I think even in Russia now, if you have 3 kids, they give you a free apartment. Here in the United States, you don't get shit, you know. So and your wages are terrible, and so on. Which is not to say that wages in Russia are so great, and also the fact that their interest rates are like 20% or something like that, which puts a big crimp in small business formation. But you know, how are small businesses doing in the United States? What support does the United States government give to small businesses? You know, when COVID happened, all the money, they shut down the small businesses, and they said, shop from Amazon, and that way you'll get what you want. And it's easy. You don't have to leave your house. You just, you know, click a few buttons. You get what you want. It comes in the mail. Everything's wonderful. And you've just thrown 40% of the working population out of business. Great. This is brilliant brilliant social planning. And this is what's going on. Did Charlie Kirk talk about any of that? Not that I understand, and not that Grok could see from his own from Grok's his Elon Musk's brainchild. His tool, the research tool that he used, from what he could tell, there wasn't, that was not part of Charlie Kirk's agenda. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that why is that? And as I noted in a previous my previous video talking about Philistine thinking and leadership critique, Charlie Kirk loved Donald Trump, and I'm saying Donald Trump was a Philistine. He was narcissistic. I'm sorry to speak poorly of the president. I'm sure he's a nice. I hear that when you meet him as a nice guy. Let's give him that. But his family has been profiting very nicely while he's been president. And he goes to England and he says, by the way, can you open up a golf course? Open up my golf course for a national tournament. Because it would be a really good thing, and I'd make tons more money. So this is in the U.S. Constitution. There's something called emoluments, which means you don't use your political office for personal gain. And I don't think we can excuse Trump of that error. So Kirk and the MAGA movement missed Trump's self-enrichment component, and he seemed to overlook things like Trump University, which was a scam, and the crypto ventures and so on. So his movement glamorizes wealth for its own sake, and it doesn't. It's part of what is called the prosperity gospel, where there's an old saying. This is going way back to the beginning of the United States and earlier, called outward signs of inner grace, which means that this is a Calvinist idea, and it means that if you're rich, that means that God loves you. So what that does is it encourages people to do whatever they have to do to get rich, and then you get lots of money, and then that's an outer sign of inward grace. So you've made tons of money, God loves you because you're rich. Well, I don't think Jesus had that idea. That was not his gig. He was not wearing an Armani suit. He fed the poor, he healed the sick, and he threw the bankers out of the temple. He was not a friend of capitalism. Why don't Christians, many Christians, not say all, but many, don't see that aspect of Jesus? He was a revolutionary. He was against, this kind of abuse of authority. So there's that. And then the other aspect is that, as I've talked about, it points to a very deep problem within United States society, which is that people have no historical perspective. They don't understand the background of why things are the way they are. And so they can criticize, Russia for invading Ukraine or something like, or Israel has a right to defend itself. They don't want to look at what caused this crisis in the first place. As I said before, if you've got a serious illness and you go to the doctor and he gets your medical history, you can find out pretty quickly whether you've abused your body or not. This is not always true, of course. Some young people die of cancer, and not through any fault of their own. But if you look at, there's this cause and effect, and it appears that this concept of cause and effect was not so apparent in Charlie's thinking. So finally, I wanted to address the issue of where is this all going, and because this whole MAGA movement has a deep effect on U.S. society, and it came to my attention that this very famous hedge fund manager named Ray Dalio has been warning about quote-unquote dark times ahead due to a $37 trillion national debt and Wall Street's casino economy and geopolitical risks such as U.S.-China tensions or the war in Ukraine, which is, Mark Rubio himself says that it's a proxy war. The United States is using Ukraine as a proxy to fight Russia because we're too cowardly and too inept to take Russia on by ourselves. If we took on Russia by ourselves, there, a number of buildings in Washington D.C. would rapidly disappear because Russia has the capability of doing that. And the reason why they haven't is because the United States has not declared outright war, but they are at war with Russia, economically, politically, informationally, and to a certain degree, even militarily, by using military intelligence and supplying tons of weapons and money to this regime that they put in charge of Ukraine. So all of those things are risk factors that are part of the collective balance sheet of the United States. And the problem is that because of the public denial and the elite denial of these issues, risks what I call social suicide, either a financial meltdown or a military humiliation, which could force a reflection. So, as a final note here, in my discussion with Grok, he was saying, well, what about cryptocurrencies? Because Donald Trump talks about he wants to make the United States the crypto capital of the world, and because Charlie Kirk is a major fan, or was a major fan of Trump, presumably that factors into the thinking of a lot of people. So I'm not going to make a judgment one way or another whether crypto is a good thing or not. But what I do want to say is that because of the financialization of the U.S. economy, it appears to me that virtually anything that becomes a thing, that becomes popular, or something that has either actual value like gold or perceived value like a cryptocurrency, Wall Street is going to get hold of that and hypothecate it. They're going to turn it into something that creates a profit for them and control by them against us. And from what I can tell, I do not think that Charlie Kirk was thinking about any of these things. He was not thinking about multipolarity. He was not thinking about that other cultures like Russia or China or India have cultures that actually have contributed at least as much, if not far more, to world civilization than Judeo-Christian civilization. Judeo-Christian civilization has been around, what maybe you could say, realistically 2,500 years. Because Abraham came around, 3,000 years ago, whatever. But it didn't really create a real impact until, let's say, 2,000 years ago with the advent of Christianity. Buddhism in India was preceded by Vedanta and Hindu philosophy, which had very, very deep understanding of how the world works. Taoism, originated 2,500 years ago with Lao Tzu, and Confucianism 2,500 years ago was talking about. Confucius was talking about family values. He's saying, the father should be the. I'm not saying whether Confucius is right or not, because there are some issues there. But the point is that in terms of formation of world culture, you have major civilizations like China or India or Iran, which Zoroastrianism, which is a factor which is not so highly recognized now, but it was a religion that have had an effect on our world civilization. So this kind of self-centered emphasis on Judean-Christian civilization is simply it's not accurate, and it can create decision-making that is contrary to the benefit of everybody, not just the United States, but the whole world. When the United States says that, these countries are inferior to us, which is basically what they're saying. China now has an economy that's bigger than the United States, has a bigger population for sure. India has a population which is, 3-4 times as big as the United States, and its economy is growing much faster than the United States. So the whole paradigm of power is completely shifting towards the East. And people like Charlie Kirk, I think it would be accurate to say, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think his assumption is that Western civilization and the United States is the supreme power in the world, and that it's got to stay that way. And this is just inaccurate thinking. So I think there are some problems with Charlie Kirk. He had some good ideas, but he had some ideas that he was just really he was missing it. What I'm trying to do in my writing and my speaking is to look at these big picture issues, because it's these big picture issues that drive the local everyday things. We don't see that, but that's actually the way it is. So when you have deep-seated attitudes that are either correct, or if they're incorrect, such as in the United States, this dominating idea of manifest destiny. God has given us North America, and now it gives us the right to rule the world. So this is a core belief of American civilization, and guess what? It's not going to work. We got to get back to, how do we take care? As Caleb Maupin says, we need a government of action that helps working families. That's what we need, and that means making education affordable, housing affordable, healthcare affordable, a clean environment, good food that isn't filled with chemicals and GMOs and all those kinds of things. Those are the kinds of things that we have to be working on, and my guess is that those kinds of discussions are not what is carried on within conservative circles. So that's basically it. So I'll end it there. And again, I want to ask you all if you would be so kind as to make a donation to my channel, either through Buy Me a Coffee, or through a subscription to Substack, or to PayPal, or to buy a T-shirt, and that'll be greatly appreciated. Partly because I can use the money, and partly because it shows me that I'm not just working all in vain here. That I have that I'm creating some actual, I may be old, but I'm still creating value. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like I'm not as old as Michael Hudson. Michael Hudson's over 80, and Ray McGovern is over 80, and these guys, they're still kicking, and they're doing great work. So just because people are, they said when I was growing up, they said don't trust anybody over 30. Well, here I am. I'm over 30, but you can trust me, okay? So thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next time.